Hello, welcome to the all-singing, all-dancing, interstellar, time-travelling NOTCAST. Well, it isn't really, it's just a middle-aged man talking to his mobile phone on a shelf about the records that he owns or doesn't own, and putting forward opinions about things he does or doesn't know very much about. And I do these every couple of weeks, or more correctly, twice a week, but the past couple of weeks have been fairly busy. In fact, it's been so busy, I was due to have a week off a couple of weeks ago from work. And I decided that actually I couldn't do it. I was too busy. So hopefully I'm off next week, but I don't know for sure. And if that's the case, I'm not going to tell you, but there will be signs. Signs like an awful lot of NOTCAST in a short period of time. But there we are. And today is one that I think dreading is not the word. I've been putting it off, and I've been putting it off for two reasons. One, hypocrisy, and two, not quite fear, but trepidation is the word. And the hypocrisy comes from the fact that I told you the last time I talked about this band, by the way, the name of this band is Blur. The last time I talked about this band, I told you I wouldn't buy Graham Coxon's autobiography. I'm afraid to say, or more correctly, have the luxury of being able to change my mind. I was filling in an order online, and I realised if I got free postage if I hit a certain amount of pounds that I spent. And I looked and I went, what have they got? And I was like, well, postage is like £6. This is like £7. I can put this in, bump myself over the free postage limit, and basically it cost me £1. So reader, I married the book. Well, more correctly, I didn't. I bought the book. And I'm now the not so proud owner of Graham Coxon's autobiography, verse, chorus, monster, which of course, if I'm going to be doing and talking about Blur, it's probably handy to have an eyewitness account from one of the actual members of the band. I've got Alex James's other book, Bit of a Blur, and his other book, What a Wanker, and his other book, Core I Love Cheese. But I haven't had this, and I thought it'd be interesting to have what NME described as the talent talking about his experiences living inside and as part of Blur during the Britpop wars of 1995, which, in the 10 months since I've last done one of these, means that it's now 30 years since Britpop happened. And there's that cliche, which is, if you can remember it, you weren't there. Well, sorry guys, I remember it. I was there. That doesn't make me better or worse than anybody else. It just gives me a perspective that people that don't remember it or weren't there don't know. And living inside Britpop was very different to experiencing it from the outside. So to give you a clue as to who I was when The Great Escape came out, I was 22 years old. I had a full head of hair. Yes, I know some of you won't believe that. And I was young, dumb, and full of Strongbow cider in nightclubs with names like Bug and Snobs and Blast Off and places like that, in and around the Midlands, rubbing shoulders with nobody very important indeed, including myself, because I was, of course, as I am now, pretty much a nobody, and I can live with that too. But I was there, and The Great Escape, this album, the fourth studio record by the Blurs, is by no means my favourite Blur album. In fact, my least favourite is probably Leisure, and then my second least favourite is The Great Escape. And sometimes these two, Leisure and The Great Escape, have a punch up in the car park to see which one is worse. Suffice to say that there are two types of bands in the world. There's bands that I love, and there's bands that I like. Bands that I love, I buy vinyl. Bands that I like, I buy CDs. You will not see a single shred of vinyl from the Blurs in this episode, because Blur I like, Blur I don't love. And not only that, The Great Escape on vinyl is something like £44, which means that for one copy of The Great Escape on vinyl, an album I didn't particularly like at the time and like less now, could buy me the equivalent of something like 28 copies of The Great Escape on CD at £1.66 from Amazon, and something like one or two decent albums by other bands that don't charge you £44 for a copy of the record. So, there you have it. Living in your very big house in the country, funded by people buying overpriced vinyl. And despite what some people say, vinyl is not God's way of telling you that you're making too much money. It's just another way to experience music. It's just a music delivery system. And if you've watched the film The Insider by Michael Mann, cigarettes are a tobacco delivery system, CDs, vinyl, they're a music delivery system, and it doesn't matter what format it comes on as long as it means something to you. And The Great Escape doesn't mean very much to me at all. I'll be really honest about that. And this is where the knives come out. Hang on, that's a Radiohead song. In short, The Great Escape is a snide album and not one that I think is particularly good. At the time, it takes its title for The Great Escape from two things. Firstly, the idea of your summer holiday. They're going to get away for the summer, as Oasis sang in Champagne Super Duper. And the idea being is that the Great Escape is that life that you want to have that doesn't involve the drudgery, the work, the commuting, the office, the wearing of the suits and the holding of the pencils and the looking at the spreadsheets. And obviously even then you can kind of see that Graham is made out to be looking at a computer. Although wife swapping is the future, there's also computers in the world of The Great Escape that will revolutionise the world of work. The second thing that we will have in there and repeated on the front side of the album is the idea of the good old-fashioned Cliff Richard style summer holiday. That is The Great Escape. The other flip side of that is, of course, the fantastic 1966, alleged fantastic 1966-ish war film, The Great Escape, in which the plucky Brits escape from their oppressors and break out of Stalag Luftkoldwitz, or whatever it's called, and go and try and live a brighter life where they're free from the constraints of the reality that has been shackled around them. And that is The Great Escape as well as an album. If you want to think about it, almost all of the themes that come into the record are around work and escape from work and around reality and getting away and getting out of it. And that is the great getting out of it. Now, this also, by the way, is a pretty bland cover for the record. It works thematically, but it also reminds me of a cover by a much better band. Not necessarily a much better record, but a much better band, New Order, and their 1993 album, Republic. These two seem to have been taken out of stock photography catalogues, probably by designers called Styler Rouge, and you can look at the contents of this and go, well, what exactly does that really sell you? What does that tell you? Well, the answer is not very much. There's a boat, there's some feet. I have no idea what this record sounds like. It could very well be actually yacht rock, because although that isn't a yacht, it's probably a schooner or a little dinghy or so, or a little speedboat that goes alongside the yachts that belong to the lifestyles of the rich and the famous. This album was born during the promotion for the Park Life Records, and the band went straight into the studio without having a moment to think about, were they doing the right thing? Like the mad scientists from Jurassic Park, they never stopped to think if they should, they only stopped to think that they could, and it could be you. The idea being is that they would just go straight in and ride the wave and then become, this is their one shot. You think about, most bands never get an opportunity to make a fourth album or a fifth album, never get an opportunity to actually have a realistic chance of being in at number one. And this was Blur's chance, and they took it. Most definitely. Damon's ambition to be a populist, he never hid that. Right from the moment where he started off doing his oompah-oompah type stuff, all the way through to the later material, never stopped thinking about being commercially successful. And despite saying in 1996 that Wembley Stadium is for wankers, lo and behold, come 2023, Blur were headlining Wembley Stadium and making a big deal out of it. So much so, there is a live album, CD and DVD in the corner over there of Blur live at Wembley Stadium. Having been to a few shows at Wembley Stadium is not for wankers. Other venues are, Wembley isn't. The fractures in the band were also starting to show. Graham Coxon was the first to be disillusioned. He was detached from what the band were doing. He felt a disconnect between what he wanted to achieve and what the band were actually making and recording and distributing. Graham's background included things like loving early Pink Floyd, Magazine, Fugazi, those type of bands. You could really hear in the way that he played his love of Wire, art rock. There's very little of that on The Great Escape. The Great Escape feels like it could have been a concept album written by Ray Davies in 1992, designed to go alongside a musical about a depressed commuter, probably called An Old Same. And his art rock sensibilities were at war with Damon's music hall sensibilities, and Damon won. Damon wanted populism. He wanted straight, clear, direct songs. Nothing much in the way of, I think, probably nothing much in the way of I'm trying to think of the words here. That you know, nothing much in the way of anything that was particularly observant, not necessarily the word, but never wanted anything that was particularly not callous, but cautious or obtuse, actually, is what I'm thinking about. And at the same point, Damon and his then partner Justine had effectively become the Britpop version of Hugh Grant and Liz Hurley. Photographed at the front of every magazine, coming out of every party, tripping over every paparazzi. It was a really, really strange time to be a fan of a band, because what you were ending up looking at was that the people in the bands that you liked, the indie bands, although indie had ceased to exist, indie didn't exist anymore. Indie just became very, very popular. It became a shorthand for a kind of, not a kind of like shy, sad boys with guitars that were suddenly absolutely enormous. Britpop took, alongside Nirvana, took the old guard of rubbish like Dire Straits and Simply Red and just swept it into the bin and went, irrelevant, don't need it, doesn't speak to our lives at all, it says nothing to me about my lives, as the Smiths of course sang on Panic. And the other members of the band were kind of like in the slipstream of that, whilst Damon was clearly playing away. I mean, heck, the chorus to Stereotypes tells you very clearly that, and let me just quickly check, wife swapping is the future, is that, you know, Damon was clearly not necessarily 100% faithful. There was never an expectation that would be the case, but what you had was suddenly someone who was elevated, or perhaps had escaped, achieved the great escape from the conventional lives of his fans by achieving financial security, relationship infidelity, and a huge amount of fame, and being able to not worry necessarily about where the next paycheck is going to come from, and was able to, and suddenly lost his ability to understand the lives that other people lived. You know, as Alex said at the time, being in an indie band, you know, you used to get really excited if you'd peak at number 38 and you'd have 30 seconds shown on the chart show on a Saturday morning. As Alex said, it was no longer good enough to go in at number 18. Your single had to be selling. Your single had to be bigger. It had to be better. The eyes were on the prize here, and the prize was the number one single. So this process really started the day after the Brit Awards in February 1995. The band went into the studio having won 4 Brits. Oasis didn't. And then went into the studio and started recording new material, of which they played, I think Mr. Robinson's Quango's on here. They played Mr. Robinson's Quango on the Park Life tour, and then suddenly they were in the studio making an album with a whole bunch of material that they hadn't road tested. And that was a strange place to be. There was a rivalry between Oasis and Blur, a rivalry between the working class, aspirational, gonna get rich kind of Oasis and the kind of more middle class, kind of like we'll make art as a statement upon reality of Blur. And there was a rivalry that was also caused apparently by when Liam met Justine and told her, I'm gonna knob you, which was, you know, particularly classy of you, Liam, you idiot. Which of course, with being Damon and having already had superseded Justine's previous paramour, Brett Anderson of Suede, who created a rivalry with Suede that then he decided he was going to then kind of like conquer Oasis. Ego, pissing contest, immaturity, all over the place, and it runs through The Great Escape like a stick of rock. I, on the other hand, was opening the NME on a Wednesday morning, reading this and going, what a palaver. And what we had also at this point was a kind of casual sexism that lived inside Britpop that was really ugly at the bottom of it. Loaded, the magazine for lads who should know better, was made by idiots that definitely did know better and didn't care. Now, obviously, if you were probably inside that bubble, inside that whale at the time, it was probably really, really exciting. On the outside of it, suddenly the culture which existed, you know, the safe spaces that I had, I'd go to indie discos, suddenly they were full of the lads that would bully you at school. They were full of the guys that would pick on you at work, the chaps that would bump in front of you, say sorry mate, and if you looked at them in the wrong tone of voice, smack you as soon as think about it. So the idea of a place for people that weren't necessarily that way inclined, they'd become marginalised. We had to go either somewhere else or live with a co-option, an invasion, so to speak, of what were previously our cultural touch points. And Blur fed into that, and they were unashamed about it. So with the band touring, various things happened. So obviously Alex split briefly with his partner. Graham met Joe from Huggy Bear, a girl power band or girl rock or whatever, Riot Girl, sorry, who very clearly were not taking any prisoners. Dave Rowntree married, and Damon became a showbiz couple with Justine, and suddenly the idea of them being artists or creators became secondary to the fact that they were successful, they were famous. Success became, almost in some respects, the means to the end. Having number one albums, selling records, headlining stadiums, even Wembley Stadium, which is for wankers, by the way, was an option. The biggest Blur got at this point was, I think they played the RDS Stadium in Dublin to about 70,000 people in 1996, and headlined the Chelmsford Festival. Obviously, their arch rivals Oasis went on to a different path, and I'll be talking about Oasis in a future episode coming up very shortly, because we're now 30 years out from this. The whole thing started off with the release of what I regard to be one of the very worst singles in British history, Country House. Country House made number one. I will talk about the fact that Country House made number one also because it came out the same week as Oasis, and the precluding single for their album Morning Glory, which was called Roll With It. Now there are reasons why Country House became number one and Roll With It didn't. Firstly, Country House was technically formatted to fuck. So there was like 2 CDs, probably a 7-inch, probably a cassette. The 2 CDs had different B-sides on. The first CD of Country House had One Born Every Minute and a version of the previous hit single To The End, which was in French, called La Comédie, or The Tragedy, I suppose. The second CD features 4 live songs recorded at Mile End Stadium. Blur, Blur headlined Mile End Stadium in London on the 17th of June 1995. And yeah, people went. Mile End Stadium is probably closed now. Probably had 30,000 people in it. But Blur headlined a goddamn stadium in London before Oasis. And that will probably surprise some of you. And on the 10th of July 1995, they supported the far superior R.E.M. at Milton Keynes, whilst Oasis were off headlining Glastonbury and supporting R.E.M. in Dublin. It was all kicking off, and there was a rivalry between the two, North versus South, working class versus middle class, and Blur decided they were going to go and fudge it by releasing one of the most god-awful singles they'd ever made. First and foremost, although it made number one and was released on the 14th of August 1995, I fucking hate Country House. It is one of the worst songs I have ever heard. It was like Chas and Dave had a secret love child with the Venga Boys. It's appallingly bad. The video is atrocious, sexist, Benny Hill nonsense with Joe Guest, formerly of Page 3, and it wasn't even a parody. It was deadly serious by the look of it. It was backed up with a huge horn section, and people sometimes mistake having an orchestra or a horn section for having gravitas, meaning, drama. This didn't. It had an oompah-oompah, oompah-oompah, stupid, call blimey, governor, I'm a cockney, call blimey, rubbish trumpet section alongside a tone-deaf, idiotic lyric about how somebody became a millionaire, got loads of money, and whoops, bought themselves in a country house, a very big house in the country. It was stupid. It knew it was stupid. And more than that, it revelled in being stupid. It was an idiotic single that realistically should have been recorded under an alias and released something under a different name, ideally with probably about as much long-lasting cultural resonance as Rennie and Renata's Save Your Love for Me, Darling, Save Your Love, or Grandpa, We Love You. It's atrocious. It's the worst number one I have in my record collection, and yes, I have some Take That albums. It could potentially have been a non-album single. Oh God, how I wish it had been. But it was so popular at Mile End even though it was a piss take of Food Records owner David Balfe, that it became the lead track off the album, and it had a sense of cruel mockery in it. It had a sense of unkindness, a sense of snide, judgmental kind of superiority, a looking down on other people, which, by the way, runs through a lot of the album like a stick of rock. Damon in his ivory tower, a wonderful artist, freed from the confines of having to do anything as vulgar as earn money and have a job, looking down on the rest of us poor peons as we bought his CDs and we bought his albums, whilst he wrote songs about stereotypes, wife swapping, charmless men, country houses, wrote songs about Arnold Sane, about Arnold Sane always does the same old thing with the same old face in the same old place on the same old day, etc., etc. And of course, also Yuko and Hero, which was his song about a working couple that never see each other because they're working so much. He probably thought some of these songs were kind of sympathetic, observational concepts around people, but most of the LP is about Damon through the lens of his superiority, the way that he was looking down upon other people lyrically. Now, you might have said this is the third part of his life trilogy. So the first part being obviously Modern Life is Rubbish, the second part being Park Life, the third part is The Great Escape, where he gets to escape from this and he gets to look at all the other people and looks down upon them. It's not vastly different from some incredibly rich person tweeting, it's only money anyway. But when Blur became that successful and Damon became that arrogant, there was a sense of the loss of a secret. Old school football, old school indie became a football chant. Old school indie became merely an affectation, another thing to be co-opted. And so all that was glorious about it, the sense of questioning, the sense of art, suddenly just became another bloody popular thing. And that meant that if, like me, you thought that indie music was actually important and relevant and meant something, you were wrong. This wasn't. This was just music. It was product. It was on the shelves, and it was fighting up against Oasis's Roll With It for superiority of number one. The other thing around the two, and this is where I wish I got my Roll With It CD single out, but I haven't because I'm not prepared, is that Country House sold for 99p on 7-inch and cassette. It sold for £1.99 on CD. Oasis sold for £1.99 on 7-inch, £2.99 on CD, £3.99 on 12-inch. And Oasis only had 3 or 4 tracks on it, including a live track as a B-side and 2 new studio tracks. Blur had 2 formats. If you wanted to own everything, you had to buy the 2 CDs at the cost of £3.98, and that put the album and the song further up the charts because it was a number one. Oasis sold 214,000 that week. Blur sold 270,000. If Blur hadn't got a second CD single of 4 live tracks, and by the way, those live tracks are Country House, Girls and Boys, Park Life and For Tomorrow, effectively, you know, big hits from the previous albums, as Greatest Hits mini EP, it wouldn't have got to number one. And if Blur hadn't been discounted, it wouldn't have got to number one. If Blur had been sold at the same price as Oasis and hadn't had a second CD full of live material, it wouldn't have got to number one. And let's be honest, we all know it. Neither Roll With It or Country House are anywhere near the band's best songs, but they are popular, and they are popular because they sold lots of copies. They're good? No. In fact, they're pretty crap, both of them. And I would go so far as to say Country House is my least favourite Blur song, apart from possibly Arnold Sane, which, come to think of it, is on the upcoming album The Great Escape, released on the 11th of September 1995. So at this point in my life, as I said, I was 22, I was out every Friday, every Saturday, I was working, I had disposable income, I had more hair, and I had lots of opinions. And they were everywhere. They were inescapable, good and bad. The album opens with Stereotypes, I think the 4th single or the 3rd single released from the album. And Stereotypes, released on the 12th of February 1996, is by no means the best Blur single at all. I mean, even looking at the cover there, wife swapping is the future with 2 monkeys holding hands. It thinks it's clever, it isn't. It's kind of insulting, and it's, as a lyric, it's callous, it's insular, it's a kind of Nick Broomfield observational view of people. And Damon didn't need to wife swap. When you're in Blur and you're headlining stadiums, women are literally throwing themselves at you, and you don't care. You're taking advantage of it. Rumour has it he had 3 mobile phones, one for himself, one for his dealer, and one for his dalliances, and 3 mobile numbers. And how important you were was depending upon which number you actually got for a start. But also stereotypes. The idea of wife swapping is the future. Him observing what's going on. Really, it was like felt grotty, grubby, and it felt judgmental. You know, he sat there going, oh, it's very easy to have. Well, it is when you're a millionaire, and it is when you're in a #1 selling band and you're headlining football stadiums, Damon. It's very easy. It's perhaps not so easy if your name is Ernald Sane and you live at number 67 Ernald Lane and all that stuff. It really isn't. And so a lot of these songs just felt cruel in their third-party deconstruction of lives that he was now removed from and didn't really understand. And I didn't like this album at all for that. The lyrics to things like Morning Glory, as you know, I'm a big lyrics guy. The lyrics to this album were grotty. They were not good, and they had very little light in them. All judgment, no kindness. And that is not a great place to be. Track 2. Oh, let's see, what's track 2? Track 2 is Country House. Well, that's a pile of shit, so let's not talk about that, because again, that's looking down at somebody who's got a very big house in the country and a lot of money, and not thinking any further than that. Thinking, whoops, I've got not throwing. Well, actually, you know, having financial rewards could be part of the payback for having been successful, having made the right decisions, or anything like that. It's just going, oh, look, I've got a lot of money. And it's like, really? These aren't the type of songs that your audience can sympathise with. You know, and one of the things for people is people forget. When I, as a listener, listen to a song, I want to see parts of that song that I recognise in my own life. I want to see parts of the personalities that are in there in my life that I recognise. I want to be able to go, I know the people that's in those songs. I've lived them, met them, been them. And you know, people don't cry at gigs to Stereotypes or Charmless Man or Country House. Ooh, I'm having a fucking giggle. Whoop, 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 whoop. Like Chaz and Dave. And pass me a 2-pint paper cup of cold lager, thank you very much, at Wembley Stadium, and I'll bounce around for a bit. People don't cry to those songs. People cry to songs like The Universal, To the End, No Distance Left to Run, because those songs are meaningful. The words are meaningful. And what's the point of making art if you're not communicating something with people? What's the point of making music if you're not communicating an idea, if you're not achieving an outcome? Some could go, well, all art is entertainment anyway, and it doesn't really matter, because all music is designed to distract you from the impending nuclear apocalypse at the hands of Donald Trump. But I like my music to mean something. You think this sold 350,000 copies in week 1. It got to #1 in the UK charts. 350,000 people are going to hear the lyrics to these songs, pay attention to them, give them the respect as an audience, and the thought that they deserve. 350,000 people are going to spend an hour with you, Damon. That's 20,000 weeks in terms of pure, raw time. Pay attention to it and treat it with respect. And he didn't do that, which means you end up with Country House as one of the worst singles ever made. And the third song on the album is Best Days, which is probably one of the better songs on there, really. It's a lo-fi, Beatles-esque number. Obviously, if you had to think about what band from the 60s was The Great Escape nearest to, it's probably nearest to the Kinks, which is handy because in April 1995, on this cassette, the White Room cassette that was given away free with Q magazine, let me just quickly check the details on here. It doesn't tell you, but it's the White Room album, a cassette that was cover mounted to the front of Q magazine, features Ray Davies and Damon Albarn duetting on Waterloo Sunset, a far superior song to anything that's on The Great Escape. And there's this sense that all through the album there was a huge influence of Ray Davies XTC, a little bit of the Beatles. So It Could Be You, for example, the Japanese single, was influenced by Ray Davis and performing Waterloo Sunset on the White Room. It Could Be You had an XTC influence. These are all songs observational, looking at other people's lives, but instead of passing anything astute in terms of commentary on them, it's snide, cruel, observational, almost superior, condescending lyrics about how all these people are mindless drones stuck in the work-life balance of the commute and the work. And where some people go show even a shred of sympathy in the lyrics, Damon shows none of that in this album. In the end, it sounds like the cruel missive from somebody that has clearly thinks himself above and superior to all the little people that have to work for a living. Aren't they stupid? They haven't thought their way out of it. Pat their head and go on, little Tommy, have a wife swap. It's all going to be fine. And that's why I don't like The Great Escape. I think it's a pile of crap, actually, which means I probably shouldn't talk about any of the other songs on the album. But I still do have the fourth single, of course, The Charmless Man, available here on box set, CD, and also, where is it now? Okay, and also standard CD single, again featuring the motif of someone playing polo, which, as you can tell, that well-known working class sport, polo, on a horse, whacking things with a bat. I have a low opinion of sport. I have a low opinion of this song. It's a charmless and unintelligent pastiche of the Smiths, this charming man. It has very little in the way of light in it. It's all shade. And as even Damon himself said, what the fuck was I thinking when I wrote that? Well, the answer is not very much. And were you even thinking when you wrote Charmless Man? Generally, it's shit. It's maybe the second worst single after Country House, of course. There are, of course, other terrible singles that are available, including Save Your Love by Renee and Renata. But none of them truly quite as bad as The Very Big House in a Country with your page 3 model and your Benny Hill video and your oompah-oompah nonsense. We've got Fade Away on the album, track 5. That's okay. It's quite good. It was, I think, originally called Rico. I have no memory of Fade Away at all, apart from the fact that Blur were outshone by a far superior B-side by Oasis of the same name that was released a year earlier. And then we have Top Man, Topman, where, as you all know, if you have to spell out your song, it's not always particularly good. In fact, it's S-H-I-T-E. And this, alongside the Universal and Mr. Robinson's Quango, the three middle songs on the album, are the bourgeois bohemian looking down on the sad lives of the ordinary people. The Universal is the only song on this that I would happily put into any Blur set list. Luckily, the Universal was the second single released from the album, released here on the 13th of November 1995. November 1995 was a bad month for me, and it was described as reggae calypso. It's, I think, a great song that should close pretty much every Blur show if it doesn't. The idea of it really could happen and the worlds just slip away. The video is, of course, a pastiche of Clockwork Orange because there are no original ideas. The video for Country House is, of course, a pastiche of Benny Hill. So why not go for your most British images that you can find? And actually, The Universal is an incredible song. It's easily one of my favourite Blur songs. It is by far the only thing on this album that I would listen to willingly unless I stuck the album on. In fact, I stuck the album on the other day to listen to it and go, well, let's see if it's as bad as I thought it was. Verdict, worse. Oh, well. And I thought that was, and I, you know, as somebody said on the Amused to Death album, everyone has their prize bar, and yours was pretty low. Or as another sign that I saw was our expectations were low, but holy fuck, Great Escape is not good. This is backed with again 4 live songs recorded, I think, at the BBC. Those songs being Mr. Robinson and his Quango, It Could Be You, and Stereotypes. And the B-sides on the other CD include No Monsters in Me, and Ultranol, and a remix of Entertain Me, which is quite good actually. I quite like Entertain Me. And then all of a sudden, we're into Mr. Robinson and his Quango. Now, Quangos are names for government committees, not great names. It's a phrase that I think I've only heard a couple of times in my career in the public sector. But now I'm at the point where I just kind of hear that and I go, that's a word that should have been outlawed in the bullshit management speak buzzword bingo list. And Mr. Robinson and his Quango is a song about a guy who works in an office in London, goes to meetings at the government, talks about things, God knows what things they are, and has a terrible life, almost as bad as Arnold Same. If I carry on at this rate of vitriol, I might actually explode. So I might just try and see if I can dial it down a bit, because it's tiring being annoyed, and I don't like being annoyed about things, despite what you might think. He thought of cars. That's crap. It's inspired by James Barr, whatever his name is, Crash, the book about the guy that likes having sex in car crashes. J.G. Ballard, I think it is. Who, by the way, he wrote some fantastically visionary stuff, but it also inspired a terrible song by Blur, He Thought of Cars. Track 10, It Could Be You. It Could Be You was released as a single. Now, only in Japan. Here's the CD single for Blur's It Could Be You. It's backed with live tracks, by the way. It Could Be You is many things. As I said, it's got the XTC influence, it's got the King's influence. It's also heavily influenced by the introduction of the National Lottery in Britain in late-ish 1994, early 1995. The idea is that you could buy a lottery ticket and somebody would win millions of pounds, and it could be you. And you've got to be in it to win it. It's sometimes called the hope tax. Sometimes, I remember the first week it happened, actually, all of us, and I was over at my friend Mark's house in Brunel, which was, by the way, it was near the university, which was used for a Clockwork Orange. And it was, we were all thought we'd enter, and everybody thought that they'd win. And there was this massive sense of disappointment when the machine, I think it was called Ernie, pulled out the numbers and we didn't win. We all thought, we're going to win. We're going to get £38 million. We can say goodbye to all of this nonsense and live our life free, unencumbered by the requirements to have to go to work and be like all those dreadful commuters that Damon sings about. And instead, you pick your 6 numbers, 45, 16, 7, 12, 33, 32 and 22. Although, of course, it should have been 7, 12, 45, 33, because those are obviously the numbers that relate to the size and speeds of various vinyl formats. I'm thinking too much. Nobody won. Or more correctly, nobody I knew won. Nobody I know has won the lottery since. I don't particularly care if anybody I know has won the lottery. We all thought we'd win. We'd all thought it could be us. We all got lied to. Totally lied to by our lottery tickets, man. What do we do after that? Well, you either buy next week or you don't. If you're not in it, you can't win it. So be it. This was released as a Japanese single. So this is a Japanese CD single that has some extra live tracks recorded at the Budokan, which are It Could Be You, Charmless Man, and Chemical World. Live at the Budokan was a Japanese-only live album that was released on the 22nd of May, 1996. Here's an original Japanese CD release, which was made up to look like a fake air ticket, including, of course, the catalogue number here in the right font. And it features, all of the set, apart from 2 songs. So I think it's missing, and correct me if I'm wrong, Charmless Man and Chemical World, both of which are on this. And Budokan, I think, should get or did get a vinyl release in 2019. Is it any good? No, it's a bog standard live album, and it reflects a very strange and unusual period in the band's history. The greatest hit set. The only track that's on here that isn't really readily available anywhere else is a cover version of the Great Escape theme tune, performed by the horn section and absolutely not worth the price of admission. This was quite expensive when it came out, so I got a copy for maybe £15 or what after it came out, and even then I felt, that's quite expensive. So don't bother too much if you haven't got a copy of Live at Budokan, because it's just another bloody live album of the band performing at their lowest point in their career. Track 11, my least favourite Blur track, is Ernal Sane. It's like a miserable version of Park Life with a third-party narrator. This one being Ken Livingstone, I think London mayor for a period of time, member of the Labour Party, guy that really likes, I think, tea and possibly something like chinchillas. And he had a particularly Arnold Same had the same voice that was always the same, no matter what he said. He had no choice about how plain his voice was or his name being Arnold Same. And the lyrics to the song Arnold Same are all the same, and they always rhyme at the end of every line with the words same or day or plain or name or pain or lame or lane or wane or grain or crane or whatever. And it's rubbish. Nobody needs it. And the lyrics made extremely clear to me that there was a snide, condescending, patronising undertone to the whole album of this incredible thinker, Damon Albarn, who'd managed to escape the petty and meaningless life that the rest of us were forced to live on the grounds that he'd suddenly gone, whoops, I've got a lot of money and bought a very big house in the country. Ernal Same is crap. The Great Escape is not great at all. And the next 4 songs or 5 songs that make up the rest of the album are equally featureless and dull. We have Globe Alone. I don't remember that song, and I listened to it last week. Dan Abnormal, which is okay, but Dan Abnormal is an anagram of Damon Albarn. Dan Abnormal also played keyboards on Elastica's album. Guess who that was, boys and girls? And it has a TV quote from an ex-lion tamer. From ex-lion tamer, the track by Wire. And it wasn't particularly good. Stephen Street was not a huge fan of Dan Abnormal at all. Then we have Entertain Me, which is quite good but very generic. And finally, Yuko and Hero, in which Damon writes a lyric about a couple pressured by work, made distance, that don't talk to each other and separate apart, which, given that's what happened to him and Justine a couple of years later, was prescient. The idea being that they were rich enough to be able to walk away from it all. The Great Escape is a bad record. It really, really is. It's snide, it's callous, it's condescending. Musically, it's unadventurous. Lyrically, it's insulting. It's completely uncompassionate about the people that he writes about and the people that he observes. And this period, to me, was one where I felt very definitely that Oasis beat the shit out of Blur, because Blur were not very good at this point in time. The music was unexciting. Graham had checked out from that period. He just wasn't very good at all. And the only redeeming feature really was that it was so bad that the band had to almost do a course correct with what they did next and came up with Song 2 and the Blur album, which, by the way, is much, much better than this because somebody finally let Graham have control of the wheel for a brief period of time. The band discussed headlining Wembley Stadium in 1996. Damon said it was for wankers. And the overall consensus was that Damon didn't like the album. Most of the band didn't like the album, but they didn't have the time to do it again. It was as described by Justine, as it was a cheesy shadow of Park Life, which is exactly what this is. It's not a very good record. The magic had disappeared. And even when you listen to the demos that are on the Blur 21 box set from this period, the extra tracks, so for example, the demos of Ernal Sane, Saturday Morning, there's a track called Incline Lift Music, which was on the Help charity CD, which just fell off my lap, which was here, was okay, but it wasn't particularly good. Even the demo of Entertain Me, by the way, was called Bored Housewives, Was there anything which could have made it any more obvious that Damon had run out of things to write about and was hastily putting together lyrics against a deadline that he didn't necessarily believe in? I'm not sure there was. This whole period was shoddy. The material wasn't strong enough. The extra tracks weren't strong enough at all, although The Man Who Left Himself is particularly good and The Horrors isn't bad, but it also has two of the worst Blur singles of all time, The Country House and Stereotypes. Actually, Charmless Man, all my three bottom favourite Blur singles, and in Country House and Arnold Saying, my two least favourite Blur tracks throughout this whole period. It was awful, and I'm so glad that 30 years has gone past since there, and that I wasn't madly keen on the band at this point, because you could imagine the crushing disappointment as you put on Park Life Part 2, The Electric Boogaloo, and come up with something as lame, anodyne, and artistically impotent as this record. So, sorry about that. I am not a fan. That's not a surprise. And that's one of the reasons why I had some trepidation about this episode, because I didn't really want to spend 45 minutes talking about a record I don't like. But that's the risk when you do a band's entire discography and you go song by song, album by album, chronologically through the period. Sometimes the only way out is through, and you've got to shovel your way out of shit to get to the water, the clear blue water of the lovely seas that are The Great Escape here on the cover of the record. The only other thing I will mention, albeit briefly, is that there was no live video released from the time, but there was a documentary called B Roads, which was aborted in a final stage and never seen, but it has been uploaded to YouTube. So give it a listen, give it a watch, and you can see the truly terrible life that Blur thought they were doing at this point. But I'm fully with Graham Coxon here. I'm Team Coxon and Team Frischman. The Great Escape is a cheesy shadow of Park Life. It is a terrible record. It is my least favourite Blur album, and good God, that includes Leisure. So that means it must be really, really bad. Right, I'm going to wrap up here. There is a live episode of EastEnders to watch, and there is some serious sitting down on the sofa to partake in. And I'm getting some notice from one of the Black Cats that there needs to be some cuddles. So I'm going to be doing that later on. As always, take care of yourselves and each other. Be excellent to each other, and I will see you soon. Thank you, if you've made it to the end of this, for watching. Ta-ta. Bye-bye. Time to make my great escape.